Good evening, and I've discovered after losing it for the first time, I lost it a second time. I found Magorian's book Goodnight, Mr. Tom, and I've just discovered the last time I read this book, chapter 7. I put the video on YouTube on the 17th of February 2023, which doesn't, I was thinking it wasn't that long ago, but actually September, it's a good 2 years 7 months, nearly 2 years 7 months, and that time has flashed by. So I was up to chapter 7 and I was debating when I found it, because it's got 23 chapters, well, 22 chapters and a postscript. I thought, well, let's get this book done. It's an ambition of mine to get this book done. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to read them in, I had an idea of reading them in blocks of 3, because I've already done the first 7 chapters. So what I'll do is I'll read chapters 8 and 9, then 10 and 11 and so on. So to 12 to 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. So sorry, let's see, 8 to 9, 10 and 11, 12 and 13, 14 and 15, 16 and 17, 18 and 19, 20 and 21. Yes, blocks of 2, 20 to 21, 22, 23. So, tonight, nearly 2 years, 7 months later. No, I haven't read chapter 7. I'm sorry. It's chapter 6 that I read last 2 years, 7 months ago. So tonight I'm going to read chapter 7 and 8. And then I'll do 9 and 10 and so forth. And then I'll be doing 21 and 22, 23 to finish the book. So tonight's reading is chapters 7 and 8. I apologise for the mistake. I thought I'd read chapter 7. It's actually chapter 6 that I read 2 years, 7 months ago. So chapter 7 is called An Encounter Over Blackberries. They slung the rubber sheet and pyjamas over the washing line and peered into the shelter. "Water," murmured Tom. "I might have known. We'll have to keep a stirrup pump close by." He patted the side of the strange earthy mound. "I'll put some more earth on today, and then we can plant a few turnips and such in it." "Ever growed anything afore?" he said, turning to Willie. He shook his head. "Always a first time. Come with me, I'll show you something." Willie followed him out of the back gate and across the tiny road, Sam scampering after them. Instead of turning left towards the village, they carried on to the right. They hadn't walked very far when they came to a tiny dirt track off the road. The aching that Willie had first felt on waking was beginning to ease up, apart from his ankles, which were still a little sore from his boots. A sudden burst of energy rose up inside him. It excited and frightened him. He had always been good at keeping still. It was wicked not to, he knew that, but now he felt a desperate desire to leap and jump. He pressed his lips together and, clenching his fists and frowning, he tried to numb the strange new feelings away. Tom caught sight of the flush of excitement burning in his cheeks. "Race Sammy to the gate," he said, pointing to one 100 yards ahead of them. "I'll hold him to give you a head start." "Run, do you mean?" "Well, I don't mean fly. Now, when I says go, you just go." He whistled for Sam and held him squirming and wriggling in his arms. "You got rabbit and bone fever, ain't you, my boy?" he said as he struggled to hold him. Willie fixed his eyes onto the gate and held his breath. "Right," said Tom. "On your marks. Get set. Go." Willie shot forth, half running, half stumbling. He clenched his fists even tighter. Bang! He fell with a hard thud onto his knees. Pushing himself up, he staggered on, feeling angry and desperate inside. In his heart he wanted to run properly, but his stupid legs were letting him down. He heard Sam barking behind him. "Go it!" shouted Tom. "Go on, William!" And before he realised what he was doing, he was running too. Willie propped himself up against the gate, gasping for breath, while Sam sat nonchalantly by his feet, an easy winner. "Cheer up, boy," said Tom. "It ain't the end of the world." But to Willie it was. He was a sissy after all. It was true what his classmates called him. He was a Willie weakling. A huge lump of misery welled up into his throat, and he stiffened his jaws so that he wouldn't disgrace himself by crying. "What's up, then?" asked Tom. "Miserable 'cause Sam beat you, eh?" Willie nodded and stared at the ground. "Can't expect to be good first time. Takes practice. Sam's had more'n you. Anyways, you beat me, didn't you?" Willie looked up and gave a brief smile. Yeah, I did." "You needn't look so pleased about it," said Tom in a disgruntled manner. He swung the gate open. "Well, what do you think?" Willie found himself standing in a large field. On one side were rows and rows of furrowed earth, with tufts of green leaves sticking out of them, and on the other far side stood a large cluster of trees dripping with apples and pears. "There's taters, cabbage, beans, peas, sprouts, turnips, all sorts. We'll have to pick them all pretty sharpish. You can help me when it's time." He closed the gate and they set off back down the dirt track towards the cottage. They were leaning over the shelter, putting more earth around the walls, when Zack arrived. "You walk through Dobbs' field?" asked Tom sharply. "Yes, and I shut both gates." Tom gave a grunt. "Can Will come out and play?" "He's out already, ain't he?" "Yes, I suppose he is," said Zack thoughtfully. "It's a figurative expression that I haven't really given a lot of thought to." "Where'd you get all your queer words from?" "Are they queer?" "Well, they ain't normal." "So I've been told often and oft," and he gave a sigh. "I say, Will, what on earth have you done to your hair?" Willie looked blankly back at him and pushed his fingers through it. His scalp didn't itch any more. It tingled. "What's wrong with it?" "Nothing. It's just a different colour, that's all. I didn't realise you were so fair." It was true. The lank look had disappeared, and it did look lighter. "Go and play, William," said Tom. "Play?" "Yes, play." "Excuse me, Mr. Oakley," interposed Zack. "Before we go, may I have a deco inside the shelter? I like to see what it looks like in daylight." "Please yourself," answered Tom, but before he could warn Zack about the waterlogged floor, he had already leapt down inside. There followed a loud squelching sound, and his feet sunk as if in quicksand. "Don't you never look before you leap?" "Occasionally. Didn't this time, though, did I?" Tom turned at the sound of the back gate opening. A rather disgruntled-looking George walked towards them, his hands stuffed into his pockets. "Mr. Oakley," he said, "me and the twins is gone blackberrying, like, and taking a picnic." He glanced quickly at Willie. "Would William like to come with us? Mum says she's making enough for us all." "I say," said Zack, pointing his head out into the sunlight, "can I come? I'd bring some food too." George stared at him in horror. He sighed inwardly. These townies were queer folk, he thought. They talked different. Their ways were odd. It was bad enough having to ask the one called William to come. He was intrusion enough. Drat his mum. "Please," pleaded Zack earnestly. "All right." What else could he say? He felt irritated. He knew the twins would be furious with him. "There's just one small problem," said Zack. "I'm afraid I'm a bit like Buster Keaton at the moment." George looked at him blankly. He's a queer one, he thought, no doubt about that. "Yes, look at me." He pressed his arms to his side and leaned forward on a diagonal without falling over. "I say," he said after having created no response, "you do know who Buster Keaton is, don't you?" "Are you going to stay down there all day?" grunted Tom. "That's what I'm trying to tell you. I'm stuck. I need a pull." They all grabbed hold of him, and after a lot of yelling from Zack and one almighty heave, they yanked him out and fell backwards in the grass on top of the yelping Sammy. "Thank you," said Zack, struggling back to his feet. He looked down at them. His sandals were encased in a large quantity of glutinous mud. He lifted one foot up and placed it heavily in front of the other, making a slow progression to the gate. "I say," he said, twisting his body round, "where shall I meet you?" "Outside the shop," grunted George, "in an hour's time." "Righto," and he slowly squelched his way through the gate and out of sight. An hour later the twins and George were waiting on the corner with their baskets, bags and gas masks. Willie caught sight of them as he turned the corner. He stopped for a moment and looked around for Zack. He caught sight of a dark-haired boy in a bright red shirt and green shorts coming out of the shop. He gave a sigh of relief and started walking again. Zack had seen him and was waving frantically. George and the twins turned to look at them. Willie felt painfully self-conscious. Zack ran down the road to meet him. His sandals had been scraped clean, but they still looked pretty dingy. From the moment they joined the others outside the shop, it was obvious that the twins were sulking. George mumbled incoherently to them. "This is Will," said Zack, introducing him to the two girls. "I've forgotten which one of you is Carrie and which one is Ginny." "I'm Carrie," said the one in the sky blue dress. "And I'm Ginny," said the one in the lemon colour. "Hello," said Willie huskily. This was followed by a long and tense silence. George stood in the middle of the two pairs, feeling very awkward and uncomfortable. He had guessed right. The twins had been furious with him for inviting the two evacuees. In their opinion, from the little they had seen and heard, one of them spoke too little and the other too much. It was rotten of George to ask them. George cleared his throat. "Well," he said, "suppose we'd best get started." They turned and headed down the lane towards Ivor's farm. Willie held an empty bucket and a small bag, while Zack carried a basket and satchel. They walked on behind the others. "I say," he said, excited to Willie, "you should have seen Mrs. Little's face when I walked in. She threatened to plant potatoes in my feet." He nudged Willie and glanced at George and the twins walking ahead. "They're a bit stuffy, aren't they?" he whispered. "Stuffy?" said Willie. "What do you mean?" "Unfriendly." "But they asked us to go on a picnic with them." I suppose so." He nudged a sore spot on Willie's arm. "Anyway," he confided, "we'll have a bit of fun, eh?" Willie was unsure about that. He wished his tongue wasn't quite so dry and that the skin round his neck didn't feel so very tight. They came to Ivor's farm. Lucy and her friend Grace Bush were playing in front of the house. They ran up to the gate and climbed up onto it. Mrs. Padfield was hanging out washing. "Hello," she said. "Where are you all off to?" "Blackberrying," said George. Lucy caught sight of Willie. Her eyes slowly expanded. "Hello," she said shyly to him. Willie shuffled with embarrassment and avoided her large gaze. "Stupid girls," he thought angrily to himself. "Stupid, stupid girls." "Fred and Harry are doing a bit this afternoon. They's helping their dad at the moment, seeing as there's no school for a bit. Best not to go to your patch, be nothing left." And she smiled and carried on with her work. "We'll drop some into you," said Carrie. "Won't we, Ginny?" Ginny nodded. "Have a good day, then." Lucy watched them going down the lane. She would dearly have loved to have joined them, but they were all older. They wouldn't want someone as little as her. She felt a tug at her dress. "Come on," said Grace impatiently. "I want to play." The others veered round a corner and came to a large field. The girls walked off in one direction to some hedges on the far side, leaving George with Willie and Zack. "Who's in the doghouse, then?" asked Zack. "You or us?" George gave a smile. "Come with me," he said. "I'll find you a good spot." He pointed to some bushes. "See them red berries?" Rather, said Zack. They look delumptious. Do what? Delumptious. That's a mixture of delicious and scrumptious. Well, anyways, continued George, undaunted by Zack's interruption, if you eats any of them, you'll die. Them's poisonous. Don't eat nothing till you've shown me. Look, there's a good 'un, he said, pointing to a hedgerow dripping with blackberries. You pick there. I'm off to find a patch of me own. An hour later, after scratching their arms and legs and staining their hands and mouths with juice, they sat down in the grass and passed a bottle of lemonade round. The girls looked a little less sulky and stared at the two townies. Willie was embarrassed. Zack, however, enjoyed the attention. "How do you do that?" asked Carrie, pointing to Willie's leg. He paled for an instant, thinking perhaps that his socks had slid down, but they hadn't. She was referring to the graze on his knee. "I fell," he whispered. "Looks nasty," said Ginny. Willie glanced at her and looked hurriedly away. When they had quenched their thirst a little, they returned to the bushes to pick more berries, staying a little closer to each other. Slowly they started to talk, except for Willie, who only listened. Mum had said that if he made himself invisible, people would like him, and he wanted that very much. He learnt that Carrie liked reading books, climbing trees and exploring, that Ginny liked naming and pressing wildflowers, knitting and sewing, and that they both liked swimming. George was keen on fishing, and his mother had on 3 occasions cooked fish that he had caught. If they were tiddlers, he always threw them back. He liked swimming too, and in the summer had built a raft, but it had disintegrated in the middle of the river while he and the twins had been sitting on it. He also played cricket and had already earned himself a bad reputation by smashing 2 windows in the village. Zack said he liked acting and reading adventure books and poetry. He also liked swimming and cycling. He said that he wrote stories, though he had to admit that he had never got further than the first 2 pages. Willie, meanwhile, not only remained silent during these conversations, but picked his berries slowly so that they might forget that he was there, but he reckoned without Zack. "Will," he said, suddenly entering into his silence, "what do you like?" He was just about to shrug off the question with, "I dunno," when he noticed that George and the twins were looking at him for an answer. He sucked a bit of juice from one of his fingers and tried to think of something to say. He couldn't read or write, he couldn't swim or ride a bicycle. He had never made anything, and he couldn't tell the difference between one flower and another. He couldn't play cricket or any other game for that matter, and he had never been fishing. He began to panic. The others would get bored with waiting and go off on their own without him. He swallowed hard and looked up at their faces. They didn't look bored. He relaxed a little, and then he remembered something. "I like drawing." "I'm hopeless at it," said George. "All my people have tiny heads and huge arms and legs." "Like you," said Carrie. Ginny laughed. "Get on with you," retorted George. "That's not true." "Could you draw me?" asked Zack. "I dunno. I could have a go." "I'm starving," said George, interrupting the conversation. "Let's eat." They gathered together under a tree and spread the food out. There were scones that had been spread with butter and jam, spam sandwiches, marmalade sandwiches, and egg sandwiches. After they had consumed these, they each had a slab of apple and black currant pie and some chocolate cake. This was followed by more lemonade. For Willie, it was his first taste of chocolate cake, scones, and fruit pies. He couldn't manage half his share, but he was helped by the others, especially George, whose appetite was bottomless. After they had eaten and sunbathed a little, they cleared everything away and moved to another hedge to pick more berries. Their baskets were soon full, and feeling tired, they made their way home. Willie felt as if his arms would surely come out of his sockets with the weight. His bucket and bag were overflowing. He puffed and panted behind the others, gritting his teeth with the effort of trying to keep up with them. After George had left his basket at home, he gave Willie a hand. He felt so ashamed of his weakness, but George didn't ridicule him at all. He seemed pleased to help. They walked down under the archway of trees to the Littles' cottage, stood outside the gate chatting to Zack, and carried on down the lane. As they came to the rectory, George stopped. "Look," he said, staring up through the trees. "Look, there's a swallow." Willie screwed up his eyes and peered upwards. All he could see was a bird. A swallow to him was something you did when you ate food, or you did to stop yourself from crying. He couldn't see how that could be in the sky. They opened the gate into Dobbs's field. George put down the bucket and strode over to her to give her a pat. Willie hovered behind him. He took a few steps towards her and raised his hand to touch her neck, but she gave a little shake of her head, and that set him stumbling backwards. He'd wait till he was with Mr. Tom again. George climbed over the gate while Willie opened and shut it neatly behind him. They walked through the garden to the back door when a voice called to them from behind. It was Tom. He was leaning out the shelter. "Afternoon, Mr. Oakley," said George. "Afternoon, George." They came over to where he stood and peered inside. The earthen floor was covered with planks, and on either side were two rough bunk beds. A tin with one side cut out of it hung from a hook at the back. Fixed inside was a candle. Underneath it stood an orange box, on top of which were two flower pots. One was placed like a lid on the other and had a hole in the base. Inside this was another candle. Above their heads over the entrance was a rolled piece of dark canvas. A potted plant hung in a nearby corner. "Cool," gasped Willie. "Ain't it fine?" "Best to be comfortable," said George, and he gave a short cough to hide his pleasure. "Proper job," agreed George. They took turns to walk around inside and sit on the bunks, and then George left to go home for tea. Willie spent the evening with Tom, washing and bottling the blackberries and eating some of them for supper. He sank into an even deeper sleep that night with the knowledge that he, Willie Beach, had survived a whole day with 4 other people of his own age, and he had made jam. And Chapter 8, School. Willie sat down to breakfast in a clean grey shirt and jersey, pressed grey shorts and polished boots. He stared out at the graveyard. It was a dull day. "Eat up, boy. Soon be time to go to school," said Tom, placing a paper bag on the table. Inside were 2 apples and a thick egg sandwich. "You can come back here for dinner if you wants, or have it with the others. Best take your cap and mackintosh. Looks like rain." He picked up Willie's label from the top of the bookcase and handed it to him. They walked together through Dobbs's field, and Tom stood by the gate and let him walk on his own up the lane. Zack was sitting on the Littles' dilapidated gate waiting for him. Willie met him and turned to look at Tom. They waved to each other, and Sammy immediately shot forward. "Samuel," said Tom firmly, "here." He stopped, glanced at his master, and then bounded back to him. Tom picked him up and watched the 2 boys disappear round the corner. George and the twins were standing in a crowd outside the village hall. 2 old cars drew up with 8 children and 2 anxious-looking mothers inside. "I say," said Zack, "it's awfully crowded, isn't it?" "It ain't usually like this," said Carrie. "They've had to get an extra teacher," added her sister. "And," said George, "we have to share the school with some Catholics. We're having it in turns. Look." And he pointed in the direction of 2 nuns surrounded by a horde of children. "If it stays like this, we ain't going to have much school at all." And he grinned with pleasure. The 5 of them went into the hall together. The blackout curtains, which were rolled neatly above the windows, stood out starkly against the light green walls and wooden skirting boards. Mr. Bush was seating the small children cross-legged on the polished wooden floor. The older children were to sit in the back half of the hall, which was filled with rows of chairs. At the front end was a small raised platform with curtains on either side. "I say," said Zack excitedly, "there's a stage." "Quickly," said George, tugging at one of Zack's well-darned sleeves. "Let's grab them chairs before the big uns get them." They ran towards them, Willie following as fast as he could, climbing over several small children on the way. Everyone else had grabbed seats at the back, and when it was too late, George suddenly realised why the particular seats they had chosen had been left empty. They were sitting in the front line of chairs. The rest of the children were seated on the ground, so that all 5 of them were now very exposed. "Drat it," cursed George. "I got some humbugs I was going to slip in me mouth." Mr. Bush and Mrs. Hartridge were talking to an elderly lady. "That's Mrs. Black," whispered Ginny. "She must be the extra teacher." Mr. Bush dealt with the older children first and placed a few evacuees with them at the back. It was very noisy. There was a lot of shouting and shuffling amongst the newcomers, most of whom were feeling bored and restless and had spent too long in the country already. Mr. Bush announced the times when the older ones were next needed and dismissed them. George, Carrie and Ginny were to be in Mrs. Hartridge's class again. She was taking the 8 to 11-year-olds. The twins had had their 10th birthday in the holidays, and George was 11. Mrs. Black was to have all the local children and non-Catholic evacuees from 5 years old to 8. Willie watched Mrs. Hartridge approach him and Zack. Zack told her his age, which was 9, and spelt out his name, apologising for it at the same time. She smiled. Willie handed her his label and said nothing. Her long flaxen hair was coiled up in a thick plait at the top of her head. Willie gazed with pleasure at her soft, pink-cheeked face, and then suddenly his heart fell. She leaned over to Zack and said, "Now, Zacharias, you can call me Zack if it's too much of a mouthful. I think I can manage, thank you. Now tell me what were you doing at your last school? You can read and write, can't you?" At this juncture, Willie's ears filled up. Zack's chattering was only a faint rumbling echo in the distance. He felt her hand on his shoulder. "Now, William," she said, "how about you? Can you read and write?" He remained silent. He didn't dare look at the others. What would they think of him? "What did you say, William?" "No," he answered, and he picked at one of the nails on his fingers and stared at the floorboards, wishing he could disappear into them. "Oh, I'm sorry about that, William. I would have liked you in my class. You'll have to go and sit with Mrs. Black's class." And she pointed to the little ones seated on the floor. Willie looked up in anguish and quickly down again. The burning inside his ears seemed to spread into his jaw. He rose as if in a daze, found a space on the floor, and sat down. He clasped his hands tightly together and bowed his head. He felt utterly humiliated. Mrs. Hartridge's class were dismissed. They were to have school in the afternoons and wouldn't be starting until Friday. Willie was left with Mrs. Black, and she and the remaining children filed over to the school. There were 2 girls even older than him who also couldn't read, but it didn't make him feel any better. One of them ignored everyone, including Mrs. Black, and just filed her nails and stared out of the window. Tom was weeding the graveyard when Willie returned. He watched his dejected figure walk past him into the cottage, and, after allowing a few minutes to elapse, followed him in and discovered him sitting at the table in the living room, his bag of apples and sandwich lying untouched. "I could just do with a cuppa," he said brightly. "You too, William?" Willie gave a nod. He pushed a mug of tea towards him. "How was it then?" Willie scraped the toes of his boots together. "Bad, was it?" Willie nodded. "Best tell me then." He raised his head. It was difficult to look at Tom without his lips trembling. "I'm with the babies." "Oh, and whose class is Zacharias in then?" "Mrs. Hartridge's." "Why ain't you? You're near enough the same age, ain't you?" "Yeah, but he can read." He paused. "And write." "And the ones that can't are with Mrs. Black, that it?" "Yeah." "I see." Tom stood up and looked out at the freshly weeded graveyard. "Mrs. Black will teach you to read. Did you learn anything today?" "Gas drill," he mumbled. "What's that?" "Gas drill," he repeated, only louder. "We did gas mask drill." He blew the top of his tea and sipped it. "There ain't even enough pencils." Tom had seen some of the roughnecks that gentle old Mrs. Black would have to deal with. Most of her time, he reckoned, would be taken up trying to keep discipline. "We'll begin this evening," he said sharply. "That do?" "What?" "Learning to read and write. I'll teach you to write your own name for a beginning." Willie's eyes stung as the ground moved in a gentle haze beneath him. He beamed. "Oh, mister," was all he could manage to say. Tom was surprised to find a lump in his own throat. "Go and have a run with Sammy," he growled huskily. "I'll get supper." Sammy, who had sensed Willie's misery and had until now remained motionless, began to bark and run after his tail. "Go on with you, boy. said Tom. Willie rose and clattered down the hallway. He ran through the gate, down the lane and across to the dirt track, faster and faster, leaping and jumping. He wanted to yell for joy, but when he tried he couldn't get any sound out. He felt annoyed at first, but then he realised that he was running far better than he had been the previous day, and that he wasn't even trying. It takes time and practice, that's what Mr. Tom had said. After supper had been cleared, Tom put a piece of paper and a pencil in front of him. On the paper were several straight lines, and in between each pair was a series of dots. "Now, William," said Tom, "you just join up the dots, from the top downwards. And when you've done that, you'll have written your name. It just takes your own time." Willie held the pencil nervously and then pressed it hard onto the paper. The lead snapped. Tom sharpened it again. "Easy now," he said, handing him back the pencil. "You got plenty of time." Willie stared frantically at the paper. "I can't," he said. "I can't." Tom looked sharply at him. Willie was frightened. His face had turned quite pale and beads of perspiration had broken out across his forehead. "I won't beat you if that's what's bothering you." "Come on, let's have a go," he added reassuringly. "I'll sit beside you and tell you how you're doing." Willie placed the lead onto the paper and slowly followed the dots down and up, making the letter W. He sat back and looked at it. "It's bad, ain't it? Ain't it, Mr. Tom?" Tom peered at it. He was surprised. "No," he said with honesty. "No, it ain't." And Willie knew by the certainty in his voice that he was telling the truth. "Ain't it?" he queried. "No," he repeated. "It certainly ain't. You carry on. You's doing fine." Willie returned to the dots, and apart from the occasional wobble, he wrote William in a remarkably smooth hand. "That's good," said Tom. "Is it?" "Do it again." Willie carried on following the dots between the lines and then stopped. "Mr. Tom," he said, "I can look at my name and draw it. Is writing like drawing?" "I don't think so. Show me what you mean." Willie found a clean, unlined space, looked at what he'd done, drew two straight lines, and wrote William in between them. "Those lines are almost straight," gasped Tom. "Where'd you learn to do that?" "Nowhere," said Willie. "I just looked at 'em and done it." Tom was speechless for a moment. When he had recovered, he picked up a pencil and ruler, drew two straight lines, wrote beach in between them, and handed the pencil to Willie. Willie drew the two lines again, and while carefully scrutinising the new word, copied it. "That's very good," remarked Tom. "Is it? Don't you know?" He shook his head. "You've just written your name, boy." "Have I?" And he stared down at the letters. He couldn't understand why those shapes were his name. Tom took his hand and made him point to the letters going from left to right, sounding out each one. Willie joined in the second time round. "Good," said Tom. He was about to suggest that he had a break when Willie pointed to the letters and sounded them out on his own. He became stuck at the double E sound. "What was that one again, Mr. Tom?" "E." "B-E-E. What's that?" "Ch." "Beach." He started again and succeeded in sounding all the letters through. "You picked that up very quick," said Tom. "Very quick." "It's copying, though, ain't it?" "Yes, I suppose so." "Mr. Tom," said Willie after some thought, "ain't that bad?" "Copying?" "Yeah." "Not when you're learning," said Tom. "Only if you're being tested, like." "Oh," he said, "I thought it were bad." There was a knock on the front door. Sam started barking. "Who can that be?" said Tom. "Mr. Tom," said Willie, "does that mean that if I copy I won't go to hell?" "Hell?" said Tom in amazement as he strode out of the room. "Don't be daft, boy. Whatever put such a thought in your head?" Willie felt enormously relieved and returned to his writing. He was interrupted by voices in the hallway. He turned and George and the twins walked in. "Before you says anything," said Carrie, as Willie stood up, crimson, "we've just come to tell you that we're miserable about you not being in our class, and that we still want you to come round with us, like." "Yes," interjected Ginny. "And," said George, "you're not to feel bad about not being able to read and that. Anyway, it ain't all that good when you can. You just get given more lessons." Carrie at this juncture gave him a poke. "What we wanted to tell you," she continued, "was that we's going up the woods on Saturday, and we was wondering if you'd come with us, like." Willie opened his mouth to speak, but was interrupted by another loud knock. Tom was hardly out into the hallway when in burst Zack. "Will," he said breathlessly, and stopped in midstream. "I say, what's going on here? Is this a party?" Tom closed the door and was about to speak when a further rally of knocks was hammered on it, and Charlie Ruddles, the warden, strode angrily in. "The front door was open, Mr. Oakley, and I saw a definite chink of light from where I was situated." "Oh, and where would that be, Mr. Ruddles?" asked Tom, a little perturbed at so many dramatic entrances in one evening. "Would that be from lying on the hall floor with your nose under the door?" The twins at this point turned hurriedly away and bit their lips. Charlie stood back aghast. "I won't go into the legalities, Mr. Oakley. There were a definite chink. Don't you know there's a war on?" And with that he slammed the door, and everyone except for Willie, who was feeling somewhat stunned, erupted into gales of laughter. And we continue with Birthday Boy, Chapter 9. And Chapter 10, The Case Next Time. And I'm sure I have read chapters 7, 8, 9, and 9 before, but I must have lost the recording for the video, which is the reason why I'm reading them again. So chapters 9 and 10 next time, and thank you for listening and watching.